Now we move on to another difficult setting, Beirut. And our next speaker is Muna Hallak. She's a Beirut-based architect and heritage preservation activist. She's a graduate of the American University of Beirut and Syracuse University Florence program. And since 2017, she served in AUB as the director of the Neighborhood Initiative, whose aim is to promote the neighborhood of Ras Beirut's livability, vitality, and diversity, as well as to promote critical citizenship among the AUB community. She led several heritage preservation campaigns and succeeded in the preservation of the Barakat building, now Beit Beirut, which she'll be talking about today, a museum of memory and a cultural and urban center. She's been working with various NGOs and she has a series of awards, and the title of her presentation is Beirut, Between Remembrance and Amnesia.
Thank you for Thank you for the presentation. Thank you, Nayat, for having me over, for the Hrant Foundation for this amazing conference and lineup of speakers. So, how can violence be remembered, and can it be remembered so that it can eventually be forgotten, so that it will never be repeated? How do we seek remembrance in a city that lived 15 years of war and 29 years of post-war amnesia? I was 7 years old when the civil war broke out in Lebanon. I do not have any memories of downtown Beirut before the war, but I feel that I know it from what my parents told me. Martyrs Square, with all its cinemas, the Rivoli, the Empire, the Grand Theatre, the Opera, the Roxy, the Majestic, the Ottoman police station, the tramway, to them, Martyrs Square was the heart of Beirut. During the 15 years of war, Martyrs Square was a major battlefield. Its buildings were deserted and destroyed. Beirut was divided into east and west along the demarcation line that started in Martyrs Square and extended along Damascus Road. This became the Green Line, literally green, because the trees grew in the middle of the asphalted roads. Where life stopped, nature took over. This was no man's land for 15 years, across which people fought each other, killed each other. Why? I, who lived the war day by day, so far, until today, do not have an answer. The war ended, or so was said, in 1990. The same year, I graduated as an architect from the American University of Beirut. To us, architects, our dream was to rebuild our city, but the Solidaire project, led by a private real estate company, took over the reconstruction process. We were left out. Downtown was bulldozed, its buildings dynamited to give way to the new, fresh plans. Only 10% of the urban fabric was restored to beautiful, but actually empty buildings designed for the rich few. The collective identity of the city was compromised in favor of profit and development. Destroyed twice, first by violence and then by reconstruction. Today, 29 years after the end of the Civil War, Martyrs Square is a parking lot awaiting developers to rebuild more luxurious projects for the privileged few. Downtown is no longer the heart of Beirut. Almost nothing remains today of Martyrs Square except the martyr statue with its dismembered hand, a lonely reminder of that painful period of our history. In 1994, when I saw the flat, empty space left by the bulldozers in Martyrs Square, I turned around and walked the Green Line. War-torn, bullet-ridden buildings with squatters, chaotic laundry lines, trickling water, broken pipes, shrubs growing out of the broken concrete. I could still smell the war. It was still there, until I reached the Sodeko intersection. That was the first time I saw the Barakat building. It was commanding the corner amidst the random urban sprawl. Though severely damaged like all the buildings I've been seeing and bullet-ridden, this building had a captivating presence with its yellow stone that reflected the Mediterranean sunlight, and most importantly, its elegant corner colonnade with the central void behind through which one could see the blue sky from within the building. The architect tried to hide the void by connecting the colonnade and letting it continue across the void with a flying beam and even a handrail, a fragile and fake connection, hiding the major division behind, trying to unify the building. To me, this was a metaphor of our country, of our city, a metaphor of our sharp divisions as Lebanese and the fragile unity that we try to portray that will remain fragile and fake unless we address the division behind it. That day, I simply fell in love with that building. To me, it represented hope. Built by Yusuf Bek Aftimus back in 1924, the building is an avant-garde architectural gem, a masterpiece of transparency and visual connectivity. One could always see the city from one side to the other, no matter how far back in the building one stood. Through the void, through the colonnaded balconies, you could have carefully planned openings to see, to connect, even if you were really in the far back. In the Barakat building, people lived the happy golden days of Beirut. In the 70s, on the first floor lived a Palestinian Fallaha family, and on the west side, and the extreme right Christian phalangist, Dr. Najib Shemali, on the east side. On the 13th of April 1975, the civil war started with an incident between these two parties, when the phalangist militiamen shot a bus full of Palestinians in Ain al-Rumani. Those two people who lived across that beautiful void that was a connecting void are the two people who actually started the civil war. The building, designed to be divided in two by the central void, was destined to be on the green line that divided the city in two for 15 years of war. Strategically located along the green line, the building was immediately transformed into a war machine, and the intersection that it sat on was named in the 1970s the intersection of hell, or the door to hell, because no one could cross it alive. The overgrown ficus tree that is now right next to the building, which has grown and grown to cover almost half of the building facade, is a living reminder of the green line. The genius of the architect was perfect for the snipers. The same visual axes that were created by the architect to connect the building to the city through that void were abused by the fighters who hid in the far back, protected by the architecture itself, and shot through the same visual axes that disconnected the city, disconnected anyone who tried to go from one side to the other. The connecting void became the disconnecting void. This is how war can change things, twist realities, and reverse logic. The genius of the architect also was complemented by the architecture of the fighting. The militias built their own architecture of war inside. 2-meter deep walls of reinforced concrete and sandbags layered with cement fortified the shooting positions. Wooden shooting boxes were placed at different angles within these walls to control the whole intersection. 24 shooting positions killed anybody who tried to cross from East Beirut to West Beirut or vice versa. This is how this building was transformed into a war machine. This is how a beautiful architecture became a killing machine. Bullet holes fill the whole building, and graffiti of war remind us of that period. When I stood behind the sniper location on the ground floor for the first time and looked through the square hole, the memories of the war that I had lived came immediately to mind. How we slept for days crammed on top of each other in underground shelters. How war invites the privacy of your life. How it sometimes unites you with strangers. How I used to run as a child and hide under our dining table because I thought the thick wooden top would protect me. How I would drag my mother and make her crawl down and sit with me. How I would look at her eyes during hours of no electricity, trying to figure out whether her eyes were blue or green, because if she dies, I have to know what the color of her eyes were. If I never see her again, if this war takes her from me, I need to know. These are the memories of the childhood that immediately ran through my mind the minute I looked through that opening. For me, I am sure that some little girl today in Syria or Yemen are going through the same thing, are feeling exactly the same feelings. Maybe someone is hiding under their dining table with their mother, because fear is the same, loss is the same, war is the same, and humanity is the same. that day, I decided that if I remembered all of this just because I stood there, then this is a site of memory, and not only for me, for the world. Many people were killed from the Barakat family. Many people killed from the Barakat family. Lives were changed from there. The city was changed from there. Our lives were definitely different before and after. Both victims and perpetrators had the right to share the stories that this place evoked, how war changes people, how war changes cities. Not only the death, destruction, pain, loss, but also the survival, resistance, resilience, and the day-to-day episodes that make life possible in times of war. How we give birth, how we get married under bombs, how we party to the sound of bombs, how we used sometimes to wish that fighting starts just because we don't want to go to school or because we want to sleep over some friends. How war becomes part of your daily life, becomes your game. As I looked through the square opening from which bullets were shot, I realized that today it was the only source of light, and the room became a camera obscura of light, of painful memories, the video I just showed. It's the building itself that created its own art. It's not me, the building itself. That light was not a projection. It was the way the light entered through that hole when everything was dark. So the building was its own artist. The war was its own artist. People who lived in the building before the war had to leave their apartments as soon as the fighting started. The Sadiq intersection was a major fighting position. After a few months of continuous bombing, the residents packed all their things and moved out of their apartments. Only on the first floor, Dr. Najib Shimali, a dental surgeon, seemed to have left in a hurry. Under the dust and debris, everything was still there. As I walked, my feet sank into a thick layer of clothes, books, newspapers, photographs, and in his clinic, that was the corner room of his own apartment, the dentist chair, the medicine bottles, the surgical tools, the meticulous archives of every patient and every tooth he has fixed, even the books that he printed for little children on dental hygiene. This man, who became an extreme right phalangist who would start a war to kick the Palestinians out of Lebanon, 50 years earlier, when he printed a book for little children about dental hygiene, he chose the Sakhra dome in Palestine with its crescent as the only representation of a building in his little book for children. This is how, when tolerance is lost, wars are started. It was like an archaeological site, and for me, it was my destiny to dig through it for years and years and reconstruct his life. Visiting cards from presidents of the Republic, ministers, ambassadors, newspapers with exactly the same headings as today, letters from his children, his love letters, kitchen utensils, every bottle that he has ever consumed. Najib loved to go to the cinema and kept postcards of his favorite actors and brochures of every film he watched in Cinema Rivoli, Empire, Roxy, Royal, Majestic, all of which were flattened totally by Solidaire, all of which none exist today. In his speech to the Maronite Patriarch, one of his speeches, he says, "If there is a bitter complaint that we raise to you, it would be the fighting between the Lebanese and their division into factions that is breaking our national unity for the benefit of our pure personal interests." This seems something that we would say today, but this was in 1932, way before our civil war. This is why this is a site of memory, not only of the war, of the city. Dr. Shimali left us an invaluable archive of the life of pre-war Beirut. Another amazing archive I found was that of Photo Mario, a photography studio that was on the ground floor where under the debris I found thousands of negatives of portraits of people who came to take their photographs in this studio before the war. Men, women, girls, boys, babies, family, and studio portraits that reflect the society and lifestyle in Beirut before the war. In 1997, 3 years after discovering the building as my little secret in the city, I was passing by and saw that something was missing. I looked and there were no handrails. I entered, and in the courtyard, everything was dismantled. The stones, the tiles, the wood, and everything was getting ready for demolition. The building had a demolition permit. The people wanted to construct a new building instead of it, and the first step was to demolish the building. I started a campaign. I went crazy. I thought there's something wrong. This building cannot go. So I started a campaign to stop the demolition and preserve the building. I went to every newspaper in town, every TV show, every local and international press agency, anybody who would listen. I offered tours. I signed petitions, did exhibitions, printed brochures and postcards. The idea of a museum of memory was not easily accepted, though, and raised a lot of controversy. Is this how we should remember the war? Is Beirut ready for a memory museum yet? These were the headlines of the newspapers around that subject. It took me 6 years to convince the municipality of Beirut to expropriate the building to become a museum, 5 years to follow up with the municipality to actually implement the expropriation decree and buy the building from the Barakat family, 4 years to set up the rehabilitation program with a scientific committee of volunteering professionals in collaboration with the municipality of Paris, and pressure the municipality of Beirut to keep all the traces of the civil war. It would be the first instance of a governmental building that still acknowledged the civil war. But yet, we started the rehabilitation, and this is the 5th year where the rehabilitation has ended. Unfortunately, we couldn't start the cultural programming, which should have gone hand in hand with the rehabilitation of the architecture. Unfortunately, with the absence of any cultural policy, the disputed history, the actual controversy over the post-war reconstruction, the people who currently run our country are still some of the same people who ran the war. We are very far from having a museum of memory in the sense that I dream of. Beirut started opening its doors to the public for different dispersed exhibitions since 2017 because the building was finished and the municipality was embarrassed to keep it closed. But sometimes there were relevant content about the city, the war, the healing, the disappeared, the refugees, and displacement. But many, many times it was just used as a background for gala dinners and random shows without any curation in the absence of any structure for this museum. Beirut today is not the museum I dream of or fought for. It is not yet open to the public as a site of memory, and its permanent collection is still in my attic. It still has no legal structure, no director, no board, no vision, no governance, no budget, and no curatorial strategy, except in my mind. I'm lobbying with the municipality of Beirut to try and move this project in the right direction, but it's not proving to be an easy challenge due to the absence of any cultural policy and the corruption that permeates all our governmental institutions. Yet, to keep the idea of the Museum of Memory present, I decided to invade the building with an exhibition of the Photo Mario collection on the ground floor, telling the municipality that it will be for only a few days, and I never removed it. What happened is that with the help of the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture and the Arab Image Foundation, we developed some of the negatives of those people who came and took their portraits 45 years ago. And we displayed them, and for me it was important to display all the 4 portraits on the ground floor through the shop vitrines, so that even if the building is closed, the public can connect to this collection. So this is what happened, and I displayed even the negatives in the raw form. These are only 80 negatives out of 7,000 negatives. The aim was to attempt to give visibility to the importance of archives and also to the role of photography as a technology of memory that not only documents the past, but invokes it into the present. Postcards were printed and given out, thousands of postcards were taken, and what is very nice is that many people who actually were in those photographs came forward and told us their stories. And with every photograph, today we have, out of the 80, 12 stories of 12 people who are 45 years older and who came and told us their stories and their memories of the city. And there are also people who came and identified that archive as a memory site themselves because they thought their grandmother looked like this, or their father had a shirt like that, or they had in their family album a family portrait that looked like one of those family portraits. So this archive became a site of memory for people to remember and to reminisce and to connect to the city today. To me, the building encapsulates the whole of Beirut. Before the war, through the archives found in it. During the war, as the building itself became a living war machine, in every bullet hole, in every graffiti. And after the war, the fight to preserve our heritage, our identity, our collective memory against being swept by amnesia and greed. 25 years after my first entrance to this building, my vision for it is still the same, a place to pause and reflect on war, destruction, amnesia, abandonment, peace, tolerance, perseverance, preservation, memory, and dialogue, a place for people to share their memories of the past and dreams for the future, for some to tell their stories and others to listen to them, a platform to reunite the Lebanese around their collective identity and start the long overdue reconciliation process to avoid future conflicts, a place to share memories about the war so that hopefully we do not ever fall into its trap again, a place of hope and change. Thank you.